Hello there.
It's late. The kind of late where the world feels smaller. Rain taps softly against the window, not loud enough to demand attention, just steady enough to remind you that something is happening outside your room. The ceiling above you is faintly illuminated by streetlight leaking through the curtains. Shadows stretch long and quiet across the walls. You're lying there, staring up, replaying conversations that ended hours ago. A laugh you gave that felt slightly too loud. A pause that lingered a second too long. A message you sent, and then reread, and then reread again. There's something about nighttime that makes your mind braver. Or maybe more honest. Thoughts you can ignore during the day begin to sit beside you in the dark. You start wondering what they thought. When you left the room, what version of you stayed behind in their memory? Was it the confident one? The awkward one? The quiet observer? Did they notice the hesitation in your voice? Or did they only see what they expected to see? It's strange, isn't it? The idea that somewhere, inside someone else's mind, there is a version of you living a completely separate life. A version shaped not by your intentions, but by their perception, their mood, their history, their assumptions. And no matter how carefully you choose your words, no matter how authentically you try to show up, you never truly get to meet the you that exists in their head. You can only imagine it. Maybe that's why it lingers. Because as human beings, we don't just want to be seen. We want to be seen accurately star. We want the picture in someone else's mind to match the quiet truth we carry inside ourselves. But it rarely does. It's almost like we are walking around with invisible mirrors strapped to our backs. We can never look into them directly. We can only guess what they reflect based on how people react to us. A raised eyebrow, a delayed reply, a subtle shift in tone. And from those tiny clues, we start building entire stories. Psychologically, it makes sense. We are social creatures. Our brains are wired to monitor belonging, to scan for approval, to detect rejection before it becomes explicit. Thousands of years ago, being misunderstood could mean being excluded. And exclusion meant danger. So of course your mind replays the moment. Of course you wonder what they're thinking. Of course you care. There's nothing weak about that. But here's the quiet complication. Every person filters the world through their own lens. Their past experiences, their insecurities, their fears, their hopes. So when they look at you, they're not seeing you in high-definition clarity. They're seeing you through tinted glass. And sometimes, without meaning to, we start adjusting ourselves to match that imagined reflection. If we think someone sees us as too quiet, we try to speak more. If we think someone sees us as too much, we shrink. If we think someone sees us as unimpressive, we overperform. We begin editing ourselves based on a version of us that might not even be real. It's exhausting, trying to manage a character that exists in someone else's head. And yet, it's such a human thing to do. To want the invisible mirror to finally show the right image. To want to say, gently, that's not exactly who I am. I remember one evening a few years ago. It was after a small gathering, nothing dramatic. Just a few friends in a softly lit cafe that smelled like roasted coffee beans and warm bread. The kind of place where conversations overlap and no one really notices if you go quiet for a while. I had laughed at the right moments, contributed a few thoughts, nodded along when someone told a story about their new job. On the outside, I think I looked normal, engaged, maybe even relaxed. But on the walk home, something felt off. The air was cool, and the pavement was still damp from an earlier drizzle. Streetlights reflected on the ground like broken gold lines. I could hear my own footsteps too clearly, steady, rhythmic, almost accusing. And then the replay began. There was a moment during the evening when someone had said, "You're always so calm. I can't imagine you getting upset about anything." They had smiled when they said it. It wasn't meant to be cruel. It was casual, harmless, but it stayed with me. Always so calm. As I walked, I felt this tightness in my chest. Because the truth was, I wasn't calm. Not really. My mind was loud. My emotions were deep and messy and sometimes overwhelming. I just didn't always show them. I didn't know how to. And suddenly I became aware of this gap, the version of me sitting at that cafe table, and the version of me walking alone under the streetlights. Did they think I was emotionally distant? Did they assume I didn't care as much as I actually did? Did they see me as steady or empty? The sound of a motorcycle passing by snapped me out of my thoughts for a second, but they came back just as quickly. I realized that night how strange it is, how you can sit across from someone for hours, and they still only meet the surface. And sometimes, without even realizing it, you help them keep it that way. Because being the calm one felt safer than explaining the storm inside. For a long time, I thought the solution was to correct the image, to clarify, to explain myself better, to make sure people understood that I wasn't just calm, that there was depth beneath the still water. I imagined that if I could just articulate myself clearly enough, the version of me in their head would slowly adjust, sharpen into something more accurate. But over time, something softer began to settle in. I started realizing that no one ever sees anyone completely. Not because they don't care, but because they can't. We are all walking around with limited angles, partial lighting, unfinished information. Even I don't fully understand myself on some days. So how could I expect someone else to hold a perfectly detailed portrait of me? There was a strange kind of relief in that thought. The version of me that exists in your head is not a mistake. It's just incomplete. And maybe it always will be. And maybe that's okay. Because the quiet truth is this: I am not responsible for managing every interpretation. I can show up honestly. I can speak when I'm ready. I can let myself be layered and evolving and sometimes contradictory. But I don't have to chase every shadow of misunderstanding. Some people will see me as steady. Some will see me as distant. Some will see me as thoughtful. Others may barely see me at all. None of those versions cancel out who I actually am. There's something freeing about accepting that I exist differently in different minds. Like light passing through stained glass, the color shifts depending on the angle, but the light itself doesn't change. And perhaps peace begins when you stop trying to control the glass and start trusting the light. Maybe tonight, the rain is still falling outside your window. Maybe you're lying there again, staring at the ceiling, wondering what version of you is living quietly in someone else's thoughts. The confident one, the awkward one, the distant one, the dependable one. And maybe you're feeling that familiar pull, the urge to edit yourself just a little, to clarify, to adjust, to be more digestible, more understandable, more aligned with whatever you imagine they see. But what if you don't have to? What if it's enough to know that you are already more complex than any single perception could ever capture? That the full landscape of your thoughts, your tenderness, your contradictions, they belong to you first. Some people will only ever meet a chapter of you. Some will misread the tone. Some will fill in the blanks with their own assumptions. And yet, the truest version of you is not stored in their memory. It's here, in this quiet moment, in the way your chest rises and falls, in the thoughts you're brave enough to sit with when the world goes still. You are allowed to exist beyond explanation. So maybe, instead of asking, what version of me lives in their head, you can gently ask yourself, can I be at peace with the one who lives in mine?
Thank you for listening, and see you in the next story.